It was just another busy day at the airport. People hurried through the terminal, dragging suitcases, catching flights, and barely sparing a glance at the others around them. Among the crowd was one man who seemed to blend in effortlessly, though if you looked closely, you'd notice something different about him. This man wasn't some ordinary traveler. He was Elon Musk, the tech mogul who had changed the world with companies like Tesla and SpaceX. But today, he wasn't interested in being recognized. He was tired. He was tired of the constant attention, the selfies, and the whispers that followed him wherever he went. Elon wasn't looking for a scene today. He pulled his hoodie low over his face, trying to hide his identity as best as possible. He wore an old pair of jeans and scuffed sneakers, which looked like they'd been through countless miles of travel. It was an intentional choice. He wanted to be just another face in the crowd, a regular person like everyone else. He had no interest in drawing attention to himself. He kept his head down as he walked through the airport, moving quickly through the crowd. The last thing he wanted was to get stopped by a fan or, worse, someone who tried to debate him about the latest news. Today, he was just Elon Musk, a guy trying to catch a flight, hoping for a peaceful moment away from the spotlight. As Elon stood in the first-class line, trying to remain unnoticed, a woman in her 40s or 50s approached. She was impeccably dressed, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and her outfit screamed high-end designer. She walked confidently, saying she believed she belonged wherever she went, and right now, she thought she owned the space around her. Her eyes scanned the line, and that's when they landed on Elon. She paused for a moment, sizing him up, her gaze narrowing. Something about him, his casual look, the hoodie pulled low over his face, didn't sit right with her. Without hesitation, she marched up to him. Her heels clicked sharply on the polished floor, each step filled with purpose, as though she had already decided who he was. "Are you lost or something?" she asked, her voice cutting through the airport's murmur. Her tone wasn't curious. It was accusing, demanding an answer. Elon, taken aback by the sudden confrontation, didn't respond right away. He knew better than to engage in a situation like this without thinking. He raised his head slightly, just enough for her to see his eyes. The hoodie partially hid his face, but that didn't stop her from seizing him. She stared at him momentarily before speaking again, this time with a sneer. "This is the first-class line," she said, eyes running over him in disbelief. "You don't look like you belong here." Elon took a deep breath, holding his ground. He wasn't here to argue with anyone. He was trying to get on his flight. "I have a first-class ticket," he replied calmly, steadying his voice. But the woman wasn't having it. Her laugh was sharp, almost mocking, as if she didn't believe his words. "Sure you do," she scoffed, crossing her arms. "Look at you. You're not fooling anyone." She didn't stop there. The mocking continued, her tone growing louder as if trying to make a scene. "If you don't move," she threatened, "I'll call security." Elon stood still, his expression calm, his patience starting to wear thin. But he refused to let his frustration show. He knew better than to escalate things. But this woman was relentless, and it was clear she wouldn't let him go without a fight. Karen's frustration grew with each passing second. The quiet murmurs around them seemed to fuel her anger, and she wasn't about to back down now. "If you don't move," she said again, her voice rising in pitch, "I'll call security." Her words were sharp, and the crowd around them began to shift, sensing the tension. Elon stood there, still calm, his eyes focused on her, but he said nothing. He had dealt with his fair share of confrontations over the years, and he knew that getting drawn into a shouting match wouldn't help anyone. But Karen wasn't going to let it go. She scolded him, her voice growing louder, drawing the other passengers' attention. Some people looked at each other in confusion, while others watched, unsure of what was happening. Without warning, Karen turned toward a nearby security officer who had been standing a little further down the line. She raised her hand, her finger pointed directly at Elon as though she had just found a criminal. "Officer," she called, her voice carrying through the terminal. "This man is trying to cut into the first-class line. He doesn't have a proper ticket." She emphasized every word, her expression one of pure certainty. The officer, a stocky man in a neat uniform, began walking toward them. His eyes scanned the situation, noticing Karen's agitated stance and Elon's calm demeanor. He arrived at their side, pausing to assess what was going on. "Ma'am, what seems to be the issue?" the officer asked in a neutral, professional tone. His eyes shifted between Karen and Elon, trying to understand the situation. Karen didn't waste a second. She launched into her accusations, her words spilling out quickly. "This man doesn't belong here. He's holding up the line, and he's making a scene. I demand you remove him immediately." Elon remained still, his gaze calm, as he listened to Karen. He knew that responding with frustration would only make things worse. He didn't need to explain himself, but he also understood that this situation wouldn't end until he showed the officer the truth. With a quiet sigh, Elon reached into his backpack, pulled out his neatly folded first-class ticket, and handed it to the officer. He didn't say a word. He just held out the ticket and waited. The officer took it, unfolded it, and examined the details. His brow furrowed slightly as he looked at the ticket, then glanced back at Karen. "This is a first-class ticket," the officer confirmed, his voice firm but polite. He didn't look at Elon, but turned his gaze back to Karen, who now stood frozen, her earlier confidence slipping away. Karen's face drained of color, her expression shifting from certainty to confusion. She blinked a few times, trying to process what had just happened. "That can't be right," she muttered, her voice shaking. She had no words left, only a growing sense of disbelief. The officer nodded, his stance unyielding. "Yes, ma'am. This ticket is valid." The air around them shifted. The crowd, murmuring and whispering, now seemed to hold their breath as they watched the woman's demeanor crumble. The whispers grew louder, and some passengers looked at Elon with a mix of curiosity and recognition. The realization began to spread through the crowd, but Karen was too stunned to notice. Her confidence, once so unwavering, was now gone. And as she stood there, her mouth slightly open, she realized she had made a grave mistake. The air around them thickened as Karen stood frozen, trying to process what had happened. The officer's confirmation of Elon's ticket left her speechless, and the growing murmurs from the surrounding crowd only added to her discomfort. Her eyes flickered from the officer back to Elon, but something was different now. The pieces were falling into place, and she could feel the weight of her mistake. It started with a whisper here and there, passengers turning their heads, eyes widening in recognition. "Wait!" Karen's voice faltered. Her gaze shifted, her expression uncertain. "That can't be." She trailed off, her words dying in her throat as the whispers grew louder. She glanced at Elon again, a flicker of realization passing over her face. She'd seen him on television, in the news, perhaps in one of his infamous tweets. Her eyes widened as she looked at him again, the truth beginning to hit her. The crowd's murmurs grew into louder whispers of recognition. People leaned in, eager to look at the man standing before them. Elon, sensing her realization, remained composed. He didn't say a word at first. Instead, with deliberate calm, he pulled the hood of his sweatshirt back, fully revealing his face. When his features were exposed, the crowd went silent for a split second, then erupted in hushed gasps and exclamations. It was as though a light bulb had gone off in everyone's mind. They knew who he was now. Elon Musk, the tech mogul, the founder of SpaceX and Tesla, who had revolutionized the world in more ways than one. Karen's face drained of color as the recognition settled in. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The confident woman who had been so sure of herself moments ago now stood speechless, her earlier bravado wholly gone. Elon's expression remained calm, his eyes steady as he looked at her. There was no anger or malice in his gaze, just a quiet, composed certainty. He addressed Karen directly, his voice firm but measured. "I tried to tell you," he said evenly, his tone calm but carrying a weight of quiet authority. "But you didn't want to listen." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She couldn't speak. The gravity of the situation and the embarrassment of her mistake left her paralyzed. The crowd continued to watch, some with pity in their eyes, others with a sense of quiet judgment. Elon didn't wait for a reply. He stood tall, his voice calm and unwavering. "Judging someone by how they look says more about you than it does about the person you're judging," he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. His words hung in the air, and Karen's humiliation was palpable. She had made a wrongful assumption based solely on Elon's casual appearance, and now, in front of a growing crowd, she had no choice but to face the consequences of her actions. The crowd, sensing the tension, shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged glances, others nodded in agreement with Elon's words. It was clear that, at that moment, the tables had turned, and Karen knew it. Karen stood there, frozen, her face flushed with embarrassment. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by the cold sting of regret. The realization of what she'd just done, accusing one of the most well-known figures of something wrong, settled deep within her. She shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting around as the onlookers' gazes remained fixed on her. There was no escape from the judgment now. The crowd that had once been silent with curiosity now buzzed with murmurs, their glances filled with silent disapproval. A few exchanged knowing looks, while others couldn't help but shake their heads. Having been fully briefed on the situation, the security officer stepped forward. His stance was firm, and his eyes met Karen's, silently conveying that the spectacle was over. Without a word, he gestured toward the exit, guiding her out of the first-class line. Karen hesitated for a brief moment, clearly hoping for some shred of sympathy, but none came. The crowd parted slightly to allow her passage, but there were no sympathetic glances, only cold stares. She strolled, head down, her confidence shattered, and her mistake was too heavy to carry. The whispers followed her, some taunting, others more sympathetic, but none were willing to overlook what had just happened. Elon watched the entire scene unfold calmly. He didn't gloat or show any satisfaction at her humiliation. His expression remained neutral, as though he had expected nothing less. But as Karen disappeared into the distance, his calm voice filled the air for those still listening. "Respect," Elon said, his tone steady and clear, "isn't earned by what you wear or where you stand in line. It's earned by how you treat people, regardless of who they are or how they look." His words were simple, but they carried weight. The crowd, now fully aware of the lesson he had just imparted, absorbed the meaning. Elon's message wasn't about proving a point or seeking revenge. It was about showing the world that genuine respect comes from understanding, not judgment. Elon paused momentarily, allowing the crowd to reflect on his words, before returning to the security officer. With a subtle nod, he resumed his place in line, his quiet wisdom lingering in the air long after the confrontation had ended. The people around him watched, some with newfound respect, others with a deeper understanding of the true power of kindness and humility. And for Elon, it was just another reminder that sometimes the best way to handle ignorance was with grace, not anger. The tension from the confrontation seemed to dissipate as Elon stepped forward to board the plane. The ordeal was behind him now, a fleeting moment in the long journey of his life. He nodded his boarding pass to the flight attendant, his calm composure returning as though nothing had happened. As he walked down the aisle, settling into his first-class seat, the flight attendant, a young woman with a warm smile, leaned in slightly. "I have to say," she began, her voice soft but genuine, "that was impressive. You handled everything with such calm, especially with all the pressure." Elon gave her a small, appreciative smile. "Sometimes all you can do is stay calm," he replied, his tone steady. "The last thing you want is to escalate things when they don't need to be." The flight attendant nodded, admiring his poise, and walked away to attend to other passengers. Elon leaned back in his seat, his thoughts wandering as the plane began to taxi down the runway. The hum of the engines filled the space, but his mind was elsewhere, reflecting on the events that had just unfolded. As the plane ascended into the sky, Elon thought about how often people let their biases dictate their actions, how easily assumptions could be made, and how quickly judgments were passed. He had repeatedly seen people acting on appearances, making snap decisions without understanding the whole picture. But what stood out to him most was how powerful calmness could be. In that moment of confrontation, when Karen had pushed him to the edge, he could have lashed out. He could have let his frustration boil over. Instead, he chose to stay composed and take control of the situation without giving in to anger. In doing so, he had not only diffused the tension, but also delivered a quiet but powerful message that respect and dignity could be far more impactful than a quick retort or an emotional reaction. As the plane soared higher, Elon felt a sense of quiet resolution. There was nothing to prove to anyone. The lesson had been learned, and not just by Karen. Everyone watching had witnessed the power of calm, the strength and restraint. Ultimately, it wasn't about winning the confrontation, but how you carried yourself in those moments. As Elon sat there, looking out at the clouds below, he realized that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remain true to who you are. As the plane settled into its flight, Elon could finally relax, the initial tension of the confrontation now fading into the background. But just as he was about to settle deeper into his seat, a young boy in the row across from him caught his attention. The boy, no older than 10, was peeking over the seat, his wide eyes fixed on Elon. Elon noticed the boy's gaze, and before he could turn away, the boy's father gently nudged him, whispering something Elon couldn't hear. The boy's face lit up, and with a shy grin, he waved at Elon. Elon returned the wave without missing a beat, a small but sincere smile forming. The boy's father, noticing the exchange, whispered proudly, "Yes, that's Elon Musk." The boy's grin widened, his excitement palpable. Elon's smile grew as he looked at the boy, seeing in him the same kind of wide-eyed curiosity he had once had. A curiosity not clouded by assumptions or judgments but fueled by wonder. Elon leaned forward slightly, meeting the boy's gaze. "Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up?" he asked genuinely. The boy's eyes shone as he confidently replied, "An inventor like you." Elon's smile deepened, and he gently tousled the boy's hair. "Well, don't let anyone tell you where you belong," he said, his voice warm yet firm. "Always believe in yourself. The world needs more people like you." The boy nodded eagerly, clearly inspired by the simple but profound words. As Elon straightened up and moved back to his seat, he felt a sense of peace. The day had started with a confrontation, a test of patience, and a moment of unwarranted judgment. But now, as he looked out of the window at the clouds below, he realized that despite the initial tension, the day had ended on a hopeful note. In that brief interaction with the young boy, Elon reminded not just him but himself as well that the power to create change and make a difference began with self-belief and the courage to remain true to who you are. Walking away from the moment, Elon felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The confrontation was forgotten, replaced by the warmth of knowing that sometimes a small gesture, like a word of encouragement, could ripple out and impact the future.